Puerto Rico is the only nation of even remotely comparable population where the most fundamental and important laws regulating its collective life are made by the legislature of another country and are administered and enforced by the government of this other country without the participation of the subject people. This indefensible and unacceptable condition of subordination and servitude has existed for more than 100 years since the United States, having demanded and obtained Puerto Rico as booty of war from Spain, first organized a civil government for its newly acquired possession. That such an anachronistic and mutually demeaning state of affairs has persisted until the present requires explanation. Two fundamental policy considerations in the U.S. have sustained colonialism in Puerto Rico during the 20th century. The first has been the determination to exercise absolute control over Puerto Rico for military, strategic, and geopolitical reasons. The two world wars reinforced this overarching motivation, while the subsequent Cold War made the need for such control even more acute. In other circumstances, such long-range national security considerations would have led to annexation as a territory followed by eventual statehood. Here is where the second bedrock explanation for the persistence of colonialism comes into play. For in contrast to Hawaii, where by 1898 the natives were already a small minority overwhelmed by an immigration process which rapidly Americanized the new arrivals, and with an Anglo-Saxon elite long in control of politics and the economy, Puerto Rico presented a totally different situation. Here was a full-blown Latin American nation, densely populated, Spanish-speaking, intensely proud of its cultural identity, and possessing its own indigenous and entrenched political and economic elite. It did not require William Howard Taft's colonial and political experience to recognize that it was inconceivable that Puerto Rico could ever be a state of the Union because it was in fact a different nation. It was obvious then, as it is today, that Puerto Rico is a non-compatible donor to the historical project of American federalism. After all, if Puerto Rico were a real candidate for statehood, why not Jamaica or Guatemala? Many desperately poor in these countries might perhaps support it, albeit as in Puerto Rico for the wrong reasons. This is why the imposition of U.S. citizenship in Puerto Rico in 1917, together with the reaffirmation that such a step did not incorporate Puerto Rico, was such a paradigmatic manifestation of the underlying basis of U.S. policy towards Puerto Rico. U.S. citizenship was at the same time both an attempt to close off the path towards independence while not opening the one that might lead to statehood. This left only the option of reforms within the status of non-incorporated territory. It no doubt remained as to what U.S. policy would be towards Puerto Rico thereafter. It was to be a colony indefinitely. And so it continued to be until the relationship has recently been brought sharply into question in the United States by the profound geopolitical and military consequences of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. The armed forces are no longer have any significant presence in Puerto Rico. That other traditional lobbying ally for colonialism, the 936 companies, are now a mere memory of the time when any change in political status would have meant the end of their federal tax privileges. The only reason remaining for the U.S. to support continued colonialism would be if this were the only way to ward off the possibility of an embarrassing statehood bid. Yet the truth is to the contrary. Continued colonialism will only breed ever more statehooders. Furthermore, international opinion, particularly in Latin America and the Caribbean, is increasingly demanding that Puerto Rico be recognized its independence. The United Nations Committee on Decolonization, for example, has been approving resolutions unanimously during the past 5 years, recognizing Puerto Rico's inalienable right to independence, and our party is presently engaged, together with the most representative political forces in Latin America and the Caribbean in a campaign that will culminate in a similar resolution by the General Assembly. The Decolonization Committee has consistently called for the U.S. government to take the necessary steps that will promote the exercise of our right to self-determination according to international law. Only a process that will lead to a serious and responsible offer of independence that must begin by putting an end to the colonial option and will inevitably require considerable straight-talking on the part of Congress as to why statehood is not an alternative to be acceptable to the U.S. Only this will finally put an end to this failed and discredited colonial experiment that has gone on for far too long to the detriment of both our nations. The proposal put forward earlier today by the president of the PIP, Rubén Berríos, if approved in its essential components, will undoubtedly put in motion a process that can only lead to decolonization and independence. For the first time in more than 100 years, there are no fundamental contradictions between your interests and ours as far as political status is concerned. It is up to Congress to seize this opportunity without delay. Thank you very much.